Welcome to Oh Yum. I'm Anna Olson, and I have another brand new recipe to share with you on today's Bake Along. I am making my fantastic focaccia recipe. If you're new to bread making, this is a perfect way to jump into it because the ingredients are simple, the tools are simple. All you need is some time, and that is true. You want to start making your dough at least 24 hours ahead of time, up to 36 hours ahead of time. And bread, the fundamentals of bread, 4 simple ingredients: flour, water, yeast, and salt. That is what is in this bread dough. And I'm just going to switch out my to metric here, pardon me. There we go. I've already measured my flour. I'm using all-purpose flour. For making focaccia, which is a flatter style of bread, we're not trying to coax magical loaves of baguette or full, what am I trying to say? Like full giant loaves. Focaccia is meant to be flat, so we don't need the higher protein flour of bread flour. I've got my 600 grams of all-purpose flour, and I'm using dry instant yeast, and this is a crazy measurement. You only need a 1/4 teaspoon. That is it, because we're giving time for this tiny amount of yeast to ferment and grow and develop nice big bubbles and also a delicious flavor. Focaccia takes a fair bit of salt, and salt, in addition to seasoning the bread, also tempers. It controls the yeast so it doesn't go crazy, so you don't get ridiculous air holes in your focaccia. I don't like focaccia that's got big gaps in it where you've got crusty bread on top and then nothing in the middle. So it takes a full tablespoon of coarse salt. Now I use coarse salt, which you can see here has just that coarse grain to it, so it dissolves gradually into the bread dough when you add the water, but also because it takes up more space in your measurement, if you're using fine salt, reduce the fine salt because it takes up, there's less air around each crystal when you measure salt. So if it's 1 tablespoon of coarse salt, use 2 teaspoons of fine salt in its place. Now I'm ready to add my water. And I'm weighing my water because a gram of water by volume is the same, a gram of water by weight is the same as a milliliter of water by volume. And I need 530 milliliters, so 530 grams of water. And there's a phrase you hear all the time when people make focaccia. Everyone talks about hydration. What's your hydration? And it's a hot topic among bread bakers. And I'm just going to pour in my water while I talk about that. And so 530 mils of water to 600 grams of flour means I have 88% hydration. And in the baking world, that is a high level of hydration. Almost there, 5. There we go. When I was first taught how to bake bread in cooking school, your basic, like all-purpose generic bread formula is a 60% hydration. So that means the weight of the flour, 60% of that weight is water. So you can imagine that this 88% hydration makes for a very wet, sticky dough. When I'm making a basic starter to start bread, it's 100% hydration. So I add 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water, and you really end up with a sticky mass. So we're doing that here, but slightly less. And I want you to mix your dough until you no longer see flour visible. But this is one of those no-knead recipes. You can't knead this. It is just a sloppy mess, kind of craggy and shaggy and rough. And this is actually where we stop mixing. I've got loads of lumps in here. It's not smooth. I don't need to put it in a mixer or stir it vigorously because time is what's going to transform this dough and develop the proteins in the flour. And that process is called autolyse. And it is simply the hydration, the process of hydrating the flour over a period of time so it becomes elastic, meaning you can stretch it and it springs back, but also it can stretch without tearing. And you want both of those. You want the stretchability so that your bread can hold in the carbon dioxide the yeast produces, but you want the elasticity so it just doesn't go too far. And that's why this time, baking your bread dough 24 hours ahead counts. So now I actually want to change bowls here because this is a messy bowl. Just take a clean bowl. I'm going to put about 2 tablespoons of oil in it because you're not quite done yet. That's not all the work you have to do. Now we're going to fold the dough over the course of 2 hours. And don't worry, this is not a 24-hour bread video. You're not going to stay with me. I have all the stages here. I've got lots of bread today. Lots of bread today. So I want the oil to be along the sides of the bowl, not just the bottom. And if you start making bread, to invest in this simple little bowl scraping tool. It's got a little flexibility to it, allows you to move your dough very easily, especially if it's sticky. I'm gonna drop that into my new bowl. And then this gets covered with a tea towel. Now, the active process you have to set your timer 4 times. While this dough rises over the course of 2 hours, every 30 minutes, you're gonna go and fold the dough. So I'm gonna show you what that looks like. I've done 1 fold to a dough. About an hour ago, I made a batch of this bread, folded it once, and you will see the transformation already. Here we go. Look at these 2 doughs side by side. This is freshly made. This is just 1 hour old, and I've done 1 fold to it. And you can see how that elasticity is starting to develop just in the course of an hour. So I will set this aside. And I want to show you how easy it is to fold. And as the dough becomes more elastic, it becomes less sticky. And also that's why the oil is there. So it essentially oils your fingers as you're folding the dough. And you fold 4 times over the dough itself. And this is enhancing that elasticity in the proteins in the flour. So you just go in underneath and lift up, rotate 90 degrees. And you can really see that stretchiness. There we go. So that's 2 folds, and I will let this go for another hour. Fold after half an hour, fold after another half an hour. So 4 folds over 2 hours. And then, you know what you do? You put it in the fridge and you forget about it. So that's when you're planning a day ahead of when you want to bake and serve your bread. And I do find, as I mentioned, 24 to 36 hours is your sweet spot. A few hours less than 24, that's fine. More than 36, I find with that small amount of yeast, it just has nothing left to it. And you start getting overproofed bread. If you ever have focaccia and it's kind of got a line of bubbles all in a row and it almost separates, that's a sign that your bread's been overproofed. So it probably just spent too long in the fridge or too long rising before it went into the oven. So let me set this aside. I told you I had a lot of dough. I told you I had a lot of dough, and now I've got a dough that has been sitting in the fridge for 24 hours. You go over here because it just came from the fridge, ice cold. And a tea towel is absolutely fine to cover your bread, even going into the fridge. Because you've got that oil sitting on it, then you don't have to worry about it drying out. A nice option you can do actually is to take a little bit of semolina or cornmeal and sprinkle it on top of the dough before it goes in the fridge. I'm just doing it now so you can see it. And that kind of creates a barrier. It's like a natural protectant so your dough won't dry out, and the semolina will actually absorb into the dough itself. So keep that in mind as well. So now this dough, cold from the fridge, will have a different feel to it, but is very, very stretchy. So now it's time to put it in the pan to let it go through its final rise. If you like a really tall focaccia, it depends on what you're using your focaccia for. If you want really tall slices, almost too tall for sandwiches, then you could put this into an 8-inch or 9-inch square pan, this proportion. I want a flatter focaccia so I can make sandwiches with it. So I'm going for a 9x13 pan. Your other option is if you want a lot more bread and a 9x13 pan, well, you can multiply the recipe times 1.5. And then, so 900 grams of flour, then you'll have enough for sort of a thicker, fuller focaccia. But then it makes for a very bready sandwich. And I've already got my soppressata ready for my focaccia sandwich. So before we put the dough into the pan, I pour in some olive oil. So I budget loosely, and when it comes to olive oil and focaccia, you don't have to measure that precisely, but I budget 2 tablespoons for the bowl when I put the dough in the bowl, 2 tablespoons for the pan, and then 2 tablespoons on top of the bread. All right, now look at how stretchy this dough is going into the pan. It comes out easily. And now just get a little oil on your fingers and let the dough do its thing. Now this is what I mean about you want the stretchiness. But you want the dough to be elastic enough that it doesn't tear when you stretch it. You want it to spring back a little bit. So don't worry, when you're pressing this dough into your pan, see how it's springing back from the corners a little bit? That's actually a sign that you've made a good dough. So don't panic. You can let it sit for an hour, it will relax, and then you can actually coax it more into the corners if you want. Just like this, there we go. And now, more waiting. 2 hours. Cover it with a tea towel again. You've got that surface of olive oil on top, so you don't have to worry about it drying out. You set it aside for 2 hours and set that timer because you'll want to preheat your oven, and it takes a really hot oven. Bread normally bakes at a high temperature. This bakes at 450 Fahrenheit. That's 230 Celsius. Get your oven nice and hot. And then when it's time to go into the oven, you'll notice the dough doesn't look very different at this point. It won't. Don't forget, there's only a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast, but boy, let me tell you, when this focaccia hits the heat of the oven, it really comes to life. So now what I'm going to do is put another drizzle of olive oil, and you can use your hands or a brush. This will promote some nice browning. I just like getting in there with my hands. And if you want just a plain focaccia, take your fingertips and dimple it. That way, this will interrupt some of those bigger bubbles that may want to form, so you don't get those big gaps or burn portions of your focaccia. Another thing you can do is add some cherry tomatoes. So press them quite firmly into the dough because the dough's going to fight against the tomatoes and try and push them up as they bake. And if you want to add cheese, now is actually not the time to add cheese. Cheese you add when the focaccia comes out of the oven. Just a little sprinkle of Parmesan. You also have the option of chopped rosemary, other herbs. You could put a little salt, a little pepper, but those I like to put on coming out of the oven because you don't want them to burn in that high temperature oven. After the 2 hours of proofing, you've got this ready for the oven, and it takes 30 minutes to bake. After all that work, you just have to wait 30 minutes. And then the temptation is when your bread comes out of the oven, is to get it out of the pan and cut into it right away. But this is the last time you have to wait for a little patience and let it sit for at least 15 to 20 minutes. Let all those hot molecules that are moving around from the oven settle into place, and then you'll get better slices out of your focaccia. I like to pop my focaccia out of the pan and onto a cooling rack. That way I don't lose the nice crust on the bottom. With the olive oil in the pan, it slides out easily. And I pulled this out of the oven about 5 minutes before we started rolling, so it's nice and warm. You can see you get those beautiful blisters on the tomatoes. I did sprinkle a little Parmesan cheese on the bread. Oh, listen to that crust. Oh, and that's the interior we're looking for. Some nice big bubbles, but also some structure, some body. You don't want your focaccia to be all air, and it shouldn't be cakey. Oh, that is, look at that. Now, a little trick, when I make focaccia for a sandwich, what you can do is cut your square, and then you cut your focaccia for a sandwich, and it might be a little awkward to eat with the tomatoes on top. Well, you want the tomatoes on your sandwich, so you flip it upside down. You can even toast this part if you want, because making sandwiches is the best use of day-old focaccia. Oh, but I can't wait. You know, this is warm, and it smells so good. A little bit of tomato on there. With that 88% hydration, that quantity of water, you're guaranteed to get a nice moist focaccia that's got a good stretch to it. And having spent 24 hours in the fridge, it's really got a well-developed flavor, and all that from a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. Really, it's hard to imagine. I hope this gives you the sort of basics for playing with focaccia. Play with your hydration. Then you can start hanging out and talking about, what's your hydration? Make yourself an expert just by practicing. That's how I came up with this recipe. Trying and trying and trying again. What's nice about it, simple ingredients. It just takes time, and you will make this recipe your own. I just know it. I'm so thrilled that I could share this with you. I wish you a wonderful week, and I'll see you again for another great bake-along recipe. Nice little crispness on the crust, too.